Hello, all. This week's chapter is on the moon in Meditations on the Tarot. Let's go through our overall impressions of the chapter first. I'll start. Yeah, I felt like the first half of the chapter was a little bit all over the place for me. I felt like it was really hard for me to know. I think that's when he was trying to talk about intelligence versus, intuition and wisdom. But just getting to that point felt very discombobulated and, all over the place, which may be intentional, but it was really hard for me to read into it until he started talking about the tree of life. Then from that point of the chapter on, it was like so crystal clear. And I really appreciated the insight that came from his discussion around the cross, Saint something's cross, and how the tree has those intersections. I really liked that, and I really resonate super hard as as I practice in a very middle pillar way. I'm really excited to explore more of the intersections between the sides of the tree in the way that he described it in this book. And then I think he did a good job in concluding on what it means. I personally didn't see the moon like this, as it never feels like I feel more calm and serene during a full moon and during moon energy things. I mean, there's a little bit of chaos, but I think that just has to do with so it was interesting to hear his interpretation on the moon and how I think it really put him in a chaotic state. Yeah, I don't know, because it was a lot of logic for while he was trying to talk about the moon not being logical. So I just thought that was interesting. Cody, what were your impressions?
Yeah, that's good. I agree with a lot of that. I thought it was a very difficult chapter, like one of the hardest chapters to parse in the book, and I think it's a difficult card. And I also was hadn't really seen the moon in that way either. I hadn't thought that it depicts an eclipse, and I think that's a really interesting idea. I kind of, in my normal way, I kind of take what he says and then kind of elaborate it in my own way. So I'm not totally sure if I understand what he's saying, or just, but that's just, that's what we do when we read anything, and that's a good thing. It's having our own dialogue with the text, right? But I liked the stuff about Bergson. He's an interesting philosopher. I've read really amazing quotes from him a lot. And I really like that, how he brought this pretty heady what continental philosopher into the mix. 20th century philosopher too. Yeah, I was surprised that it would go into the nature of intelligence, or whatever his definition of the nature of intelligence is, and really dive into that, because I hadn't thought of the moon as that, especially because I've always thought of the moon as being really having to do with not the intellect that can parse the world, but the intuition, though, underneath emotional stuff that we don't see. But I see it like the yin yang thing of that, with the emotions versus the intellect, and how that does kind of will speak to both from the angle from which it does. So yeah, I thought it was a really interesting chapter. I definitely feel still a little bit confused by parts of it. That's probably a good thing.
Same. Britannia, yeah, how was the chapter for you?
So I agree with most everything you guys said. I do agree with the chaos, though, in the sense of I get more energy, like I get like insomnia around the full moon. And I notice that I have to like learn how to control this chaos because it's like almost like this flooding of like outside energy into myself, and I'm like noticing it. It's almost like when you do like an invoking and you like feel, you can feel like that. It feels like that for me, but like full fledged. And I think it's like a twofold, like you guys were saying, emotional and intellectual, because it's like emotional in the sense like the moon blocks out the sun, so it like in the card it's kind of like showing you like your darkness, but it's also shining light on it in a way. So it's kind of like that, the twofold thing, like the duality that he kind of denies and then accepts like each chapter. But I never really interacted with the Sephiroth tree. So I thought that was kind of interesting, like for like energy and mapping things out. And then I think, you know, because the moon is in control of like tides and stuff. So it's like a physical thing. So that's more of like the horizontal, like it's in control of our like physical world and like the environment around us. But it also is in control of like an emotional state that people go into around full moons. And I thought that was like an interesting like way of like noticing like the different like, I don't know, Kabbalic cross like lines, and then how they kind of interact with each other during that time, like what that card can mean for you. Like, I don't know, it was really interesting. I definitely like, there were parts of it where he went like deeper than I thought and like not in like the direction I thought. But yeah, it was pretty good. I think I enjoyed the chaos part too, because I think that's like kind of part of my experience and what I observe other people experiencing. So it kind of, once you label the chaos, it becomes pattern. So it's not chaos anymore. So in a way, he's almost like solving his own like mental scramble. Like you can see that he's like thinking it through in the beginning of the chapter, and then at the end, he's like, "Haha! Like I've nailed it." And then you're like, "Oh yeah." But yeah.
Cool. Same. That's how it felt. All right.
Here's the
Oh, cool. Thank you.
that
Ooh, pretty. And see, that's like gnarly and interesting. I like that.
different in several ways.
Yeah, how do you, I mean, I like the Thoth deck has, it looks like has the full moon and the eclipsed moon or the new moon on there, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. It has a scarab holding the sun.
There should be a
Which is-
meditations on the Thoth deck.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's probably Crowley's book of Thoth or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. um, well, and I also like that the author starts the chapter with retrograde movement, because tomorrow Mercury's in retrograde, the 29th through the 19th. And this chapter really aligned with my life because I received a thing about retrogrades for Christmas, which is interesting. So I'll read up on that. And things felt a little chaotic last week in a moon sort of way.
What do you make of the retrograde movement that he's talking about? What's your
I mean, I definitely need to do more research on, like, that's why I'm kind of excited to open up my Christmas gift on it and like experience what, like, try to really feel what it is. It's the 29th of December through the 19th of January. So just kind of cool that I have it in my brain that it's like, and I'll at least like be able to notice things because of it. The author, I mean, again, I feel like it really propelled, even just starting off the chapter this way, and then how he was writing after that, it kind of propelled him into this chaos state that like his sentences were really, really long. Like it was almost like half of each paragraph there was only like 2 sentences per paragraph, and they were very long sentences. And it was like so much trying to be logical through it that I was getting really like kind of frustrated and a little bit like just irritable about it. so yeah, I mean, retrograde is like something that's looks like it's going backwards, but it's actually moving forward at a slower rate. Right. And like that's or what?
Yeah, and it's almost like,
Astronomy-wise?
well, yeah, astronomically, yes, like
Astronomically.
that's what it's doing. And I don't know, I think for humans it can be either a circle or a spiral depending on how dimensional you see and feel. And I think like the two-dimensional way of seeing it is you're only hitting a circle, and so that's why people are like, oh, Mercury's in retrograde, I'm just hitting the same, like skid marks I hit last month or whatever, and you're like, oh, you're hitting a circle, but really like it's actually like a spiral, you know. So I don't know. I think that's kind of interesting too, because it kind of asks you to like elevate yourself and like dimensionally like think in a broader way that's like a lot bigger than yourself.
It's a good image. I've never noticed a time in my life where I've noticed it to be retrograde though, and like noted that my life was different because of it. I'm sure maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but like that's never been a thing that I've like, Mercury's in retrograde, that's why I'm acting like this, like I've never said that about myself.
I'm not really I'm not super into that, but I also notice full moons people get weird, and so like around the time that I'll be like, oh, people are getting weird, I'll like look it up and it'll be like, oh, Mercury's in retrograde. I'm like, really? Like, okay. So I think there's a sense of chaos in the sense that like a two-dimensional person will be like, that thing's going backwards. Ugh, like everything's backwards, everything's ass backwards, everything feels wrong, or
Oh,
You just muted yourself.
oh, now it's really quiet.
Feel bigger. When we think bigger and feel bigger, I think that takes the perspective into a bigger place, and it also shows us that there are bigger powers at work and that there's a lot more going on. Because you'll have to you're not like, oh, that planet has the same orbit as we do. It doesn't. Just like you have to know that other people don't have the same orbit as you do. And so like you may feel like you're like they're moving forwards, but they feel like they're moving backwards, but it looks like they're moving backwards to you because you're moving forward. And you know what I mean? Like there's no up or down or right or left in space or in like that realm of like feeling and energy and stuff in that way, where I don't know, I feel like when there's gravity at play too, it kind of has that like weird effect on people. Like I don't know, it's very interesting. I don't know if it's like a kinetic energy, how like there's a lot more friction during like the earth has more friction when there's super tides because all the water is being pulled to like one side of the earth from like a supermoon. They'll have like these giant, like they're called king tides, and like the tide is like 3 times the amount of tide that it usually is, and it's like straight up like when our orbit and our tilt and the moon align, that like super yokes the water all to one side. It makes like an egg shape on the earth, like all the water you can like I don't know, it does like these king tides and stuff. So like there's like this actual like pull of like matter. So when you think about like the friction or like energy that's like dragging in a direction or like kind of discombobulating, I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, Gordon.
But I don't know.
Gordon
I go more into science than like the astrology. I'm more like the science like backing of it. I'm like, I think there's like a scientific reason for the feeling.
Yeah, Gordon White talks about it being like the in and out breath. The moon is like responsible for the lungs of the planet, like pulling the earth in and out. It's like pulling the water one way and then letting it go that way. So there's like it's that rhythm, the rhythm of the earth and ourselves that it's creating.
I agree with that. The book that Apocalyptic Witchcraft too is very like, I mean, that's the part where I'm on too, is just paying attention, like women hold that, tide within themselves. So being mindful of like how I think it was described like the work week and or maybe this was a post or something, but I mean with like emotional stuff, and just your hormones or whatever, it's like that tide exists in everyone, just at different rates. And so being more in tune with yourself in that and how the earth is going through that as well, it's kind of interesting.
So then how does that relate to intelligence?
Yeah, I mean, that's so,
I think it's emotional intelligence, like I was just talking about with like the 2-dimensional versus like 3-dimensional awareness. I think being more aware and being more sensitive, you're like more raw, but like most people will like shell up when they feel really like vulnerable. But I think that being vulnerable around everyone at the same time, recognizing everyone's being vulnerable at the same time, for some reason they're all being stripped of that thing. They're like, whatever, like everyone's kind of feeling that way. Even like right now, like when society's angsty, everyone's vulnerable and everyone kind of knows it, but nobody says it. But I think it's that kind of acknowledgement.
totally.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, and emotional intelligence has a lot to do. It's just being able to be with your emotions, right? And not just let them like just take you wherever.
Or
And
be
just
with other people's emotions and not take
be
them
with other,
on.
yeah, be able to just like listen without like defensiveness or like trying to fix or all the things we do. But like that's a but that's like something that's like it takes this being present, so it takes like a kind of a mental intelligence to like know what's going on. Well, no, yeah, I guess that is the intelligence. I'm trying to relate it to the book here, but like I think there's like a warning against, like, I think the problem that he's kind of somewhat warning against is like when faced with the uncertainties of like the emotional tides, and the pull of the moon, the like dark side, that which is hidden on the moon or behind the moon. Those kind of like hidden things, that unconscious, that which we're like, um which we have to develop emotional intelligence to deal with. When faced with that, it's like there's like this automatic, what he's kind of saying, that there's this automatic like rebellion against it to like make sense, to like start making sense of the world, and thereby killing it, right? Like regressing, like turning it into dead matter.
I mean, I've
So that
experienced
it can
that.
be parsed. It's like parsing. I'm about to digress here, but yeah, so like the idea is that like is not to do that and not to get just totally caught up in the chaotic tides of the emotions, like to somehow like ride some kind of middle ground. And that's like being in the flow of life, right? It's like what he's saying, and not just killing things to like make sense of it.
Well, and I kind of think of it like with the Mayans and like how they used to sacrifice, like their celestial calendar is impeccable, like impeccable all the way up through like, solstices and equinoxes and, what is it, eclipses and all that stuff. But I think it's like almost kind of cautioning to like see past the like sacrifice of it and notice that it is a pattern, and don't be like, oh, this is like a freak thing that's happening right now and it's like chaos. Like what, back in the day when like, they were watching the eclipse, like, like losing it, like Y2K. But I feel like if you can be more intelligent and like, not to backhand them, but be more intelligent and recognize like, hey, like after a long period of time of having, we have the precious resource of time and history to like reflect back, and they didn't, but we get to learn from knowing that that's a pattern instead of a chaos. And I think in a way it's kind of like that, sitting in that darkness of the chaos, but knowing that there's like light on the backside of it, and that it's not just chaos, that there is kind of like a flow and like a, like if you're in darkness there will be light again, or that kind of vibe. Because I don't know did you guys ever check out the eclipse that just happened like in like 2017? I think it was the last one in the US.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like you can feel the eclipse happening. Like if I was blind, I'd still know the eclipse was happening. Like
Yeah.
the
You were next to it.
temperature changes, the temperature changes, all the birds go
Ripples in the
quiet.
It was nuts.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
absolutely
it was
nuts.
wild.
And
It felt like
yeah.
it felt wild. Yeah, and it was but like everyone around us, there was like, I was at a festival, so there was like so many people that were just feeling it, and everyone was like quiet, and it was just like this weird moment where like I just felt like for like eons in time, like humans have been gathering to watch the eclipse together in this weird awe that comes over you. And there's this little kid, he went, "Daddy, daddy." And he's like, "Is that magic?" And I like almost started crying. I was like, "Yes, that's magic, magic." Like,
God. I was around a
was
bunch
so
of,
magic.
yeah, like sober people. I just got a hotel and went up there with a friend, but we were just watching it in this like big field, and everyone around was like drunk after. Seriously, people were like howling. And like we went to lunch and it was like everyone was in this jovial, it like felt like we were in this like, yeah, like medieval painting of like a pagan holiday where people were just like, "Cheers, buddy." You know, like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, like it was just like primal.
It was primal and unifying, but humbling.
Yeah.
And it was very somber in a certain way, but then like when it comes back out, it's like, oh, you're like happy to see the light again, but you're almost like, oh, the moment's over. It's like this whole weird thing, and it's very microcosmic of the macro of like how you feel about life, and like you go through your whole life and you'll be like feeling this weird way. I don't know. It was a total trip, but I loved it so much. Like one of my favorite moments in life, honestly. It was very
Mhm.
powerful.
Yeah. I feel like that's a good allegory for dream space and like moon space, like it feels very, and that's where I've had issues, disconnecting with, things, ascribing too much meaning or too much intelligence to the things I've seen in vision, and having that be like the end all be all and intellectualizing it out till it has meaning in my life. When in actuality, like it's a glimpse of a reflection of something that you're feeling, and it's, presenting itself in this way to you. And, so interpreting symbols, I feel like was at least where my mind was going to in the beginning of this chapter, and how like, yeah, there is a tendency to over like intellectualize it or over subscribe meaning to it in your life. But like understanding how to have a balance where like, it's not just a bunch of hogwash garbage. Like, no, this is representing some emotional state that you might be in, but it also doesn't mean that it's going to happen, and that there's nothing you can do about it, or that, you need to like go and do the thing that it was telling you to do necessarily, that you could just like be cool with it and also like think it was a cool moment. Like go through that.
Well,
So.
you can also choose to surrender or choose to be active. And you can also, if you feel like, oh, this is what's going to play out, you can either do the self-fulfilling prophecy way where you're like, oh, basically like subconsciously make that thing happen, or you can take that like third wall away and kind of like be having like that three-dimensional intelligence again, like where like you're saying you see past it into like the depth of what's happening, and to where you're like, that doesn't have to be the way things are. The reason why I'm having this feeling or vision is to sidestep that thing. And that's like a bigger way of dealing with things. And like you have to accept that, yeah, maybe the cards are set to play out like that, but because I know ahead of time that that's how things are setting up, I can maneuver myself away from that. And I think that's where that intelligence comes in, where you don't have to have a human sacrifice every eclipse. You can just be jovial and like, just have one of those like buzz on life moments where like it just really feels intimate and amazing for everyone in like this way where you feel like you saw like a once in a lifetime thing together. Like that's a small thing, but it's also like a big thing because it's like something bigger than yourself too. Like these celestial planets and like their movements and like how much they travel and like what you get to see and when you get to see it, like those things are once in a lifetime moments, and I think that's really cool.
Mhm.
Because I think even like back in the day when magic and spirituality was like in its infancy, like I guarantee you people were looking at the stars and feeling some sort of way about like eclipses and shooting stars and celestial retrogrades and stuff like that. I think that was
Like magic
probably,
was at its most prime, really, because it's
yeah,
like you're living
exactly,
in just it all the time,
the
There
awe.
wasn't separation between that. Like we separate things out to ascribe meaning. And that's really what the book is kind of, I think the book really like says the pitfall. Like, I mean, I just noticed how like confused and like hard this was to read, honestly, like in the beginning, because I think you're trying to dissect it out too much. Like,
Yeah. And that's actually
He's almost,
what you just said, Haley, is like exactly what I was thinking in this chapter. He's like creating this story. By the way, I just wanted to say what you guys were saying I think really relates to like the idea of unifying intelligence with intuition in this book, in this chapter.
Yes.
Look, we're doing it.
Yeah, but
We're making it happen.
and this is what this has to do with too, is that so he's quoting Bergeson, like talking about like how the intelligence, in order to make something intelligible, it like has to like relate to things as they were in like some memory, and then create, and then like, so it's like killing it, setting it into one thing, and then like dividing it up so that it can be like figured out. But what he and Bergeson, I think, falls into this problem, which is like has plagued Western intellectuals, of like separating nature from ourselves, separating the natural world, like as if and he's actually, and Bergeson is actually getting at this, but he's still doing it, in that he's like separating nature, and he even uses the word nature with a big N in the quotes, but as if there's this nature that we can figure out, like that's separate from our intellect, to that can figure it out. So he's already describing this thing from this like perspective that's division.
Yeah.
But he's getting at this truth that it is like the Western mind is like has become to this like idea of intelligence as being something that we have to figure out this world out here in order to like dominate it, in order to like get ourselves through it. And I think other cultures in other times have it's like the animist thing again, it's like have much more like fluid idea of what is like there is no nature, like there's not necessarily a word for nature, it's just everything is, and we're part of it. And like dreaming, and like what you were saying, like dreaming is just part of, like there's less separation between the dream world and the real world. Like fact isn't like something that you can even come to. Like fact is like, because it's process. Fact is like everything that is becoming, so already I think intelligence doesn't have to be construed in this way, that it's like controlling and dominating and killing, because I don't think people actually necessarily think that way, unless they have built this like colonialized mindset, which we have. So like Bergeson is just trying to get himself out of that, but he's still using the terms,
colonialist terms, to describe getting out of colonialist mindsets. Interesting. But I mean, I would argue too that like intelligence isn't the most sought, I mean, not to bring this so society wise now, but I don't think intelligence is not valued higher than creativity right now. Like from what I'm seeing in a lot of like, at least like corporate mindset, which is, I'm sorry for even like bringing this topic up in this like book club thing, but it seems like the people that I know that are doing well corporately, like are seeking creative stuff in that space, like are trying to be creatives within these tech spaces, or, learning how to, I mean, this is just based on a few friends, and even like what I see like brought out in a lot of things, like, they want people to do like the grunt work, but really they're outsourcing a lot of that information out into like other places so that only the creative stuff can be going on in like the corporate offices, And I think that's a big shift from even when this book was written until now, and probably what Bergson was saying, right? Like from the intellect being the most prime thing that everyone's after. Like, I really think it's like creativity now in terms of like the corporate environment, or just in terms of what people want to do with their free time, is like do something creative. Like that's always usually what they say, I mean, not everyone, but I think that's an interesting kind of thing when you relate that to something more like intuition and wisdom, like you have to really pull from that when you're talking about creative, less of the intellect with that space.
But creativity, I think like are still, I think a lot of the these people's view of creativity is limited
True.
in the sense that they're still like using, I think they're still operating from the same paradigm,
Okay.
right, of nature versus us, and on a large scale. I mean, I think you're right that people are moving away from that, because already we have these philosophers like Ferguson that have been developed upon by people like uh, what's his name, the integral guy,
Alan?
integral and Alan.
Oh,
Is it
Alan.
yeah, yeah, the integral philosophy guy. What is his name? Anyway.
Anyway, I think if you get more creatives
But
in
like
those
things,
spaces though, like there's just going to
yeah,
be change. Like it's
right.
you're not going to be able to operate under the same paradigm, which is interesting.
But they're still operating. They're like corporate spaces are still like operating on
I just think it's
making
happening
money. I mean, it's
slower
still
than we
like,
want
it's
it to.
still a matter of, it's still quantified. So like their creativity is being applied to like
Profit mongering.
yeah, and like even in science, yeah, there's creativity, but it's still like what can we do with these resources
Like
to like
exploitative.
creatively, so you can be infinitely creative with the resources you have, you know, as an exploitative process, you know. So it's not their creativity and intellect aren't opposed by any means.
True.
Some of the most creative people I know are like the most have like the
Intelligent.
most refined intellect, you know. But and sometimes it like, and I think that's what he's talking about in this book is that it's like certain ways of thinking like bind us to like the thinking that we know better, you know. And that's something I definitely find myself doing all the time. Like what he talks about, know better, it like constricts us into like he says like the perfectly geometrical pond, like we're crayfish in this pond where it's like and what he's saying is we're limiting ourselves in that in our through these ways of intellect of just like we're going to figure out this world and define it and all that. And I think what you are saying is true, that people aren't as interested in doing that anymore, like more and more. That's really cool. And that might change the corporate structure to where like we won't care about making money anymore or something like that, but I don't know about that.
It should. It just depends on, yeah, whether it's the creative force is going to destroy it or, you know, transmit, you know, change it, evolve it, you know, like, I don't know. That's what we really like have to see what happens.
Yeah. But I like this idea of like diving into that stagnant pond too, you know, like a little bit. Like not just, it's not all the transcendent. Like let the scorpion sting you and kill you so you can go into the underworld, you know, kind of thing. And that's what like, so you can explore those things. And it's not just about rising above, but you have to go
sit
down.
with it. Well, you have to sit with it. You have to live through it. I mean, that's also like we're experiencing the shittiest part of that, you know, I think like in our lifetimes. And this, you know, I mean, maybe not forever, like the shittiest part of the entire thing, but we're definitely in a fall right now, you know, so it is dark days, like in terms of, you know, even though we have so much luxury around, it's this like empty luxury, you know. And there's a lot of people that are, yeah, devoid of, you know, life and creation and being tied with things, you know? So, I mean, but you have to go through that in order to have it either be destroyed or changed or learn how to navigate through it and what part you play. And not that there's no right answer, like really. And that's where like you can have scorpion energy and, you know, that's what you're supposed to do during this time, or, you know, you cannot, and you can be eagle, or you can be crawfish or do whatever the heck you want, you know, like, I don't know. Like there's no more, I don't find, I mean, in at least my practice, there's no like obligation. It's just like, what's going to be, what do I want to do? You know, like just refining myself in that way. And then navigating that, and the people that are attracted to that are the people that, you know, I want in my life that sorry, I'm on a rant now, but that's,
Well, he even says in this chapter, like, got to learn from everybody, right? So you're saying that, I feel
because
like.
they're just a reflection of you. It's just you
Yeah.
presenting yourself in a different way, and there's lessons in everything. And I mean, I'm just trying to, surrender and flow and know that, like, if something's seeking me out, that means that I must be like needing to seek that out too. Like there's something to learn there and something to grow. And just now it's just the choices that are made in the meantime,
Yeah.
Or if you're repulsed, then you're repulsed and you've learned it, And you can move on to the next thing. Should I read a long quote?
Yeah.
On page 500, I kind of just highlighted this whole thing, but I don't know if it's going to be. The human being is decomposed into three principles: spirit, soul, and body, when it is a matter of the place that man occupies between God and nature, or into four principles: physical body, vital body, astral body, ego. So then, okay, maybe this isn't a good quote. When it is a matter of the practical task of mastership by the operant of his instruments, as in the case of Raha Yoga, or even into seven principles: physical body, etheric body, astral body, lower self, reason, intuition, and higher self. When it is a matter of evolution of the human being in time, or lastly into nine principles: three corporal principles, three soul principles, and three spiritual principles. When it is a matter of the relationship between the microcosm and the macrocosm within the nine spiritual hierarchies, which reflect in their turn the divine Holy Trinity. I don't know why I read that.
Yeah, that one's pretty it.
I guess, what? That just kind of points out how he's separating it so hardcore. And kind of points the redundancy of separating these things into hardcoreness, right?
Yeah, it's these systems, like creating these systems. Again, it's like separating things out so that we can like figure it out. And he's saying there's utility to that, right? But then it's not everything. That's like,
he ends the paragraph by saying, because intelligence, even when it is engaged in occult science, clearly represents to itself only the discontinuous.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if I agree with. Right?
I think in this occult sciences that he's kind of talking about kind of tend to do that, but occult sciences tend to like ultimately get to this point of continuity, I think. Like,
what does he mean by discontinuous?
Discontinuous, he's talking about kind of the like chopping things up, like so that into pieces so that we can know them better. It's kind of like the scientific method, like figuring out, or like generally like the how science works is like figuring out how things were, like, and then predicting the way they can be by these vignettes of like information that we get like in static states, rather than just being in the continuousness of the experience. It's like being in the in gnosis is like continuity, but being like figuring things out, chopping things up. And Bergeson is saying that everybody does. That's like the means that humans make to the means humans use to make the world intelligible. But I think Bergeson's wrong on that.
How so? Or
by what I already said. He's operating from this place where nature is separate. And that like, and he's very like using that kind of Eurocentric like terminology of where like I think other cultures do live in a more continuous and actually do already. And he says in this book, he's like, oh, it's so hard for anybody to blend, to like have a perfect blend of intuition and intelligence, and like it takes like a great master to do that kind of thing. But I think like certain indigenous people just do that naturally, that's like just built into because it's like, and that's conscience too, where he gets to conscience in this chapter, describing conscience is like having that moral quality, like you're so like ingrained in the world, in your ecosystem, in your environment, and like all in relationship, in continuity, that you understand how things work, like you understand how things work so that you can be a custodian to your life, to your community's life, to the life of your ecosystem, that kind of thing, to where like it's just a natural, you just do it naturally, like knowledge comes that way, and it's not a matter of like figuring it out so you can better it or best it. It's a matter of living
Yeah,
with
it's
dreaming
it's on
with it.
what page? I'm sorry. I was gonna say it's on page 510. There's like that kind of like summarization of like Bergson, where it's like the intuition of Bergson speaks in the fruit of the gradual transmutation of the intelligence, which has put its light at the disposal of the whispering from the black depths, the instinct wisdom. So we're kind of like talking more about like the depth of the instinct wisdom instead of like the more like your own personal like intuition that he's speaking of is kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like, oh, I don't remember which card it was, but it was basically like you're seeing your tiny limited perspective, or you're choosing to like kind of like see be in the light and kind of like be in like the divine like wisdom, where there's like self wisdom, which is like, oh, like how do I operate through this world and make money, and then there's like that divine wisdom, which is like kind of more like a different type of intuition. I think intuition is like not the best vocabulary he could have used to make the distinction, but I get what he's saying.
Yeah, but he's saying like he's operating from this like Western occultist who's like thinks that you have
There's
to
a hierarchy.
transcend,
There's
this
a
like
hierarchy.
this transcendence, and like, well, I think that it's like that it's imminent, that it's all, and I think that's more of what like an indigenous, like certain indigenous practices are like, it's imminent. It's not, you don't have to like elevate yourself above these things. You're in it, you're in the world together.
Agreed.
But, and I think it's, the funny thing is he like describes these states as if like, and I think that's like maybe the Western mind does kind of have to do that, because I think it seems to get you to the same place, right? On some level, but I'm not totally sure of that either.
I like there's like there's two quotes on like page 511 where it's like the direct communication between intelligence and wisdom is, truth to tell, only the development of conscious, which is what you guys were saying earlier, which is extended from the domain of action to the domain of knowledge and is awakened there to point of becoming the light of intelligence. And then like later on in the page, conscience thus suffers from intelligence as a vast world of inner experience does the empirical world of the outer experience. The intelligence therefore can therefore develop itself and grow in two directions simultaneously: the direction of the outer empirical world thanks to the senses, and the inner empirical world thanks to the conscience. Like creates even more of like four-dimensional view, because it's like there's like an inward movement and an outward movement, upward and like downward, like vice versa. I don't know, I really like that because I think it does create order to the chaos, but in a way where like chaos seems natural, and there's like an intuition to that and like a wisdom to that. Like you've seen like other countries, how their driving situation is. You're like, how do people drive in India? Like they're on the wrong side of the road and there's like horse carts and motorcycles and just like it's hectic as hell. And like you'd be surprised how like often that works. Like you see in like Asia, there's just so many cars and they all kind of like find their way into working like in like almost like the fish in the ocean. But I mean, a lot different for us because we're humans. But I think there's this kind of like ebb and flow too, because like inside each of those cars is a mind thinking about where they're going and what they're getting to, and like like there's this inward and outward like ebb and flow. So I kind of really liked when he brought it all together that way, because I felt like he was going in a lot of different directions to begin with, and I was kind of like, oh, which way is he gonna go? Like, because I think he does that at the beginning of every chapter, and sometimes like he has like the threat of almost losing me because I disagree with like half of what he says, and then the other half seems like a little chaotic, but then he like brings it all together. So like I felt like around like this part of the chapter, I was like, okay, like I get what he's saying. I think sometimes I think that the hierarchy just doesn't vibe with me. And so I like the distinction between wisdom and intuition and intelligence. And, you know, like there is even a hierarchy within those three words, but at the same time, I think they're all kind of like breadcrumbs to each other in a way where, you know, you first have to have like one sense to have another sense to have another sense, like heightened senses. I don't think it's necessarily like a hierarchy. I don't know, maybe I just have a problem with like authority and like structure in that way.
Well, I mean, I think you're pointing to understanding the tree of life in a different way too, because the pages leading up before that, which I do want to talk about, he really gets into what he describes intuition as doth, right? In between Binah and Chokmah, which is wisdom and intelligence. Kether being the crown, you know, and the middle pillar, Tiferet, Yesod, Malkuth. This is on page 507.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I like the tree. I don't of life. I'm really excited to learn more about it as my magical career continues. But I never viewed it, even though it is a hierarchical looking structure, like I don't think it's meant to be read hierarchically. Like there are different worlds in these, you know, domains, and these are the things that lie in them. So like intelligence and wisdom are such broad, you know, things in the world of emanation. So when you have that type of doth in the center, like I don't even think those are like, yeah, they're not like above or below that, like Malkuth, you know, like necessarily. Like, I mean, I would even say they're the culmination of everything is in Malkuth, and a culmination of everything is also in Kether and all of the above, you know, I mean, more in a middle pillar kind of way for me, but yeah, so.
Yeah, no, I agree with that a lot more.
Right.
Yep.
I think he
Well,
would
because like
agree
the
with
triangle
that,
shape is almost like a funnel in and like a pouring out. So I feel like there's like, I don't know. That's why I like triangles, because I feel like there's an inherent energy too of like giving and receiving.
it contain triangles historically, I think in magic contain energy. So like goetic work is done if you are invoking a demon, you keep it in a triangle because it'll keep the energy inside that triangle, where like circles emanate out. So like, you know, I don't know if I've ever told you this thought before, but that's like triangles have that kind of contains.
Maybe that's why I like triangles so much, not the demon part, but just like the containment part.
Well, yeah, and that's
Because like
kind of
I do that a lot naturally when I'm like really stressed out and I'm meditating. I'm like,
Cool.
okay.
That's a really good.
It's funny.
Or I mean, depending on, you know, well, you're storing all your energy if you fly, you know. So I guess depending on how
and then
you
I
use
open
it.
the triangle at the bottom and I feel like it's pouring out. It's like one of the things that like pour energy. Yeah, anyways.
What were we gonna say, Cody?
I was just gonna say that like that's kind of the point of the tree, is that it is like it is it's like it is a containment of God's emanatory power, whereas otherwise it's just infinite everything, you know. Ein Sof or whatever the term is, but
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Design
So it's like that's, and there's containment in creation in that sense, but yeah.
true.
So there's the triangles are there for a purpose. They orient. And that's like you can create all kinds of numerology from that too. But just the triangle, right? Just the like charge, you know, just like the pure energy emanating, and then Binah like collects it and starts the idea of form, right? So that's the first triangle. You have a line, it's just like a point, which is Kether, a line, which is the line from Kether to Chokmah, and then a triangle, you know, which is the tripod on which anything can stand. Thing can stand. Yeah.
Well, I like how tripods kind of are indicative of I guess, dispersing weight. Or, you know, like having like either it's balanced like this way and it's like balancing, or it's like this way where it's like dispersing the weight, like
Yeah.
from one point to like multiple points.
Hmm.
The guardian at the threshold is at Doth. He talks about that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And is that like, that's like crossing the abyss, right? That's the idea. And
I think Doth is the abyss too. Is that wrong or right?
I'm not
I don't know
sure.
enough about that yet, but I thought it was in between the triangle of like, I mean, location wise, you know, it's in between the Tifereth triangle of Geburah and Gedula,
Mhm.
and the line, because that's the reflection. It's the first reflection of the triangle. In
Mhm.
between that space is the abyss, and
Mhm.
Doth is the key to the abyss,
Mhm.
which is where he's saying holds the guardian of the threshold, which is meeting yourself, right? Or meeting, I mean, I don't know if it's yourself, but
Yeah, I think a lot of traditions that, you know, holy guardian angel, like whatever that is, or is is that
is the same.
I think so. I think that's like what people talk about
Oh,
as being,
because it is intuition, direct.
yeah.
Just
Mhm.
connected all the dots for me. Thank you.
Oh, I kind of like that. Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of ways, like the Taoist idea of Wu Wei, you know, effortless action. It feels like the same thing.
Yeah.
Like mastery through, and there's like mastery through repetition, and kung fu, and like,
Which is a
and where you
culmination.
have, yeah, where, and then like you have mastery because you've really applied yourself in the world, you know. So it's not like necessarily applying yourself to like some esoteric knowledge of God, but like really applying yourself to the world, and not in a way that of like understanding it intellectually, but like feeling it. Like any sport is the same. Anything you do that's like physical that you come to intuitively. You know, a baseball player doesn't analyze the trajectory of the ball that they're going to hit. They intuitively understand speed and trajectory. They can hit the ball.
True. Trippy. I mean, I do think it is more intuitive than, or how do you say, if you are not into, I mean, yeah, using the word intuitive to describe this a little bit, what oxymoron, but like, I think you can flow into that space a lot. Like the path leads you to that space. I think naturally, whatever practice you're practicing, if you're practicing it, it's just like that's the trajectory of it, is reaching some point of like some guardian of threshold or some what's the Taoist term again?
Wu Wei.
Wu Wei, some form of like Wu Wei, which would be like in extreme flow.
Yeah. Yeah, and this card is interesting, and I like the Thoth card because there's like it's waves, right? Waves below, like these waves above coming up. And then the other card too, but like it this card, speaking of like the path and like knowing that there's this guardian, is like in this narrow path between the two towers, is this idea of like it's like and it's since, and the moon is like, it's showing you the hazards of like the spiritual path. I feel like a lot. It's like showing you what you're up against, and like, and how, and like preparing you to like do the journey, you know.
Trippy.
That's, to me, that's a lot of what I got out of this chapter.
Yeah.
Like the tricky, like, and again, it's like the tricky what he talks about the antimonies again in this chapter pretty heavily, like navigating these contradictions, these intellectual contradictions. I love that, like Kant, what he talks about Kant identified as these kind of existential contradictions that like lead us to like settle on something. It's rather than like being with the contradictory. That's the sense I got what he talks about in that section.
I
But
might have missed that part.
yeah, these kind of fundamental like mental like contradictions between like the infinity of the universe versus like the particularity of things, you know.
Since Kant, the fact of spellbound state in intelligence has increased more and more in significance and certainty up to the present day. Indeed, with Kant, the limits of intelligence were brought to light.
Yeah.
He demonstrated the fact of its imprisonment, and he addressed thinking humanity with the grave warning that one can formulate in the language of imagery of the 18th arcanum of the tarot as follows. The nocturnal luminary is eclipsed. You find there the face of man instead of the pure light of the cosmic objective truth. One can escape the prison of this eclipse only by turning to the moral consciousness of the transcendent self. So that is like face yourself, face your darkness, face the guardian of the threshold, which is a reflection of you back to yourself in order to transcend through and understand where you're supposed to flow.
Yeah, and I think what happens and what he's describing with the Kant, and it's in a little bit different of a place, I think.
Okay.
Kant stuff, but he's describing kind of where people run into their own reflection and retreat, and that's like the formation of ego in a sense, in my idea, and like that's where, because it's terrifying, because you run into yourself, you run into these contradictions that and you run into these contradictions, and then the self steps in to like solidify your point of view on one side or the other rather than being in the contradiction. So you see yourself in that, right, the reflection of yourself, and then you retreat, and then like you don't take it that transcendent step further that he's talking about. That's like, and this is the card that shows you like that there's that path, but you have to like at some point, yeah, confront your contradictions and not just let yourself just come back, just not just be like, just see only yourself in it and just like regress.
Wow. I think that perfectly, summarizes the moon, or the,
Yeah, nailed it.
yeah, I think that was like a good understanding of what purpose it has on, I don't want to say purpose, but yeah, what you'll be faced with as you encounter the moon on your spiritual journey.
Yeah.
Be like, don't turn away from yourself. That we're going to be like a general tarot card reading.
Yeah, it's like holding yourself accountable to that higher self, like wisdom, intelligence, intuition, like culminated into one acknowledgement and awareness, which is kind of like that one state where it's like you are the point in between all those things, in which where you can like have all of them at your facility to use to kind of navigate things. I don't know. I think it's really cool how intellectual humans make like things that come so natural to like other animals in a way where you like define like that kind of like instinct, quote unquote, but there's like a wisdom to their instinct, and it's, I don't know, I think that it's kind of fun. I don't know, I see humans as we're just like another animal with like a different way of thinking and stuff, and so I think it's really interesting how we do, like, he is cutting up, he's almost doing what he says not to do, but like he's doing it for the sake of being able to explain it. But I think it is interesting to see how we dice things up and what we come to the conclusion is the working forces and like where they all come together, and then we come back to that like intuitive, like almost indescribable flow state.
It's exciting.
Yeah, and we do have these intellects that have such strong memory. We have such strong memories, and we can write things down, and we can preserve memories and story, and we can pass them on to generations through like instruction on the land,
Mhm.
or we instruct. So we have, like, I guess that's what I would maybe say sets us apart from most other animals as we know them, that we can do that.
Because we can, yeah, we can like, we have such an I mean, I don't want to just ascribe the whole world's purpose of healing, but I think as a human being, I feel very grateful that you can like heal, and like really go through like, yeah, be able to dissect things so that you can form different things, and create in new ways. Like that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And we can do it. Yeah. And we can do it in a way that's like, yeah, it's very destructive. So yeah, like that we create rifts that need to be healed.
Yeah.
Or we can do it in like a more graceful, but that's how we figure it out, how to like ultimate trial and error. Ultimately figure it out, how to be more graceful.
How to be graceful, Earth edition.
Yeah. Or how to accept God's grace, I guess.
According to our author.
Yeah.
All right. Any final words? Should I look for a quote? Oh, well, there is nothing of technique. Here all is art and grace in Christian mysticism, Gnostic, and magic. So art and grace.
Yeah.
There we go.
That's inspiring. See, that's how I like that.
I know. I agree with that. Art and grace. That's all you need. I mean, his thing was all you need is love. Like I think he said that at some point in the chapter, like just surrendering to God's love.
Yeah. And that's what creates art and grace.
Okay, right.
I think that's what produces it.
I mean, I agree with that. All right, I'm going to stop the recording. Maybe. There it is.